Hi, I'm Robert Berenger. I'm chatting today with Dr. Brian DeVries and Dr. Gloria Gutman. They're involved in fostering end-of-life conversations, community, and care among older LGBT adults. This project's based in Vancouver, also in Edmonton, Toronto, Montreal, and Halifax. And I just want to start out by saying, what is the value of an end-of-life conversation?
Well, it's really important that people who are growing old have someone that can give them some help and what we call social support. And so they may not have the traditional wife or have contact with the traditional family, because most of the heterosexual community are served when they become old and frail by their spouse and by their kids. So if LGBT people don't have spouses or don't have kids, then they need to talk amongst themselves, to talk amongst the people that they are close with about what's going to happen, and to find ways to express the way that they would like to be taken care of when they're old, and when they're at the really old, in the stage of end of life.
So in the heterosexual community, just by default, the spouse, and most people have spouses in comparison to the LGBT community, and with that, not having a formal spouse, it's probably really important to make things like representation agreements and wills and power of attorneys, enduring power of attorney, those kind of plans. Did you want to expand on that?
You're right. I think those are critical elements that need to be addressed, and to build upon Gloria's point too, that these conversations take place in an environment that denies death. Right, that these are not the sort of social conversations you have in everyday gatherings. And that's part of the difference, I think, with a traditional family structure, that even if these conversations are difficult and unlikely to happen, it may well be that a child will feel compelled to say to a parent, I think you need more support than you're getting, or I think we need to talk about these sorts of issues. If we're calling upon friends, as LGBT people do, there isn't that same sort of support for a conversation like that. And so it needs to be intentional. It needs to be better organized, and that's where these documents come in, and where it's important that we provide an environment to nurture such questions.
Well, end-of-life conversations are certainly important. I was just wondering also with housing, do you think we need LGBT-specific housing, or do we need just housing in general that is tolerant for LGBT persons, or do we need both? What are your opinions on that subject?
I think we need both, because certainly in the focus groups that we have conducted, some of the lesbians, some of the gay men, some of the transgender people said that they would like to be with other people, other LGBTs, whereas others within those three groups said, not on your life. They said, really, I would like to be with other people who are, who share ideas, who maybe share my religion, who share my race, not necessarily sharing my sexual orientations.
Well, that's very interesting, because you've obviously got good feedback from the focus groups, and we've learned things and what people want. I was just wondering, with Brian, you've done some work in Palm Springs. How does that compare to what you heard in California?
I think similar. I think Gloria's captured it well. I think there's I think we need both. I think there's an immediate need to provide a safe, comfortable place for older LGBT people to age, to receive the care that they deserve and need. And many facilities currently aren't providing that. So I think there is an immediate need for the development of such facilities. But I think providing facilities and services that are appropriate and acceptable to LGBT people also means you're providing services and support that would be acceptable to a large number of other people. I firmly believe that the more inclusive we make any environment, the better it is for everybody. And I think creating an environment that's acceptable and safe for LGBT people also benefits everybody. It's creating an environment that allows us to age authentically as a whole person, receiving the care and support that we need and offering the same.
So it certainly seems that you've learned from the focus group that people, they're not just lumped together as one group, even though sometimes when we have a label like LGBT, we sort of like going down that road of what do this group want. But there's diversity among the LGBT group, and that's what you've learned in your focus groups.
Well, it was really neat in the focus groups to have individuals, for example, in the lesbian group, who were drawing attention to the fact that some of the lesbians are women of color, and some of them are people from different religions. And it certainly, for me, made the point that this is not a homogeneous group.
Yeah, I remember as a graduate student hearing one of my faculty members say, when you've met one old person, you have not met them all. And I think that that's true also, as you're pointing out, and as Gloria is, with the LGBT population. You've met one, you haven't met them all. There's diversity within diversity. And that's, again, I think, what the study of LGBT lives, what our sort of research helps identify, draws puts a light on really the breadth of diversity that exists, that's important for all of us to understand.
Well, and one of the interesting things in talking, when I've been talking with Brian about today's older persons who are LGBT and those of the future, and the fact that, you know, with the changes in society's acceptance of diversity in sexual orientation, that in the future we may have a much more heterogeneous society in general, and that there will not be this type of discrimination we see now. And it's interesting, even when you talk about the lingo, you know, we talk about LGBT, but there's also the Q's and a whole bunch of other letters of the alphabet that reflect the diversity within the community.
I think the more letters we add to the alphabet, the more we start to appreciate, I think, what Gloria is saying, the diversity that exists. And in some ways, we need just a better language to be able to characterize this diversity, and it's maybe a whole person language.
Do you think there's a benefit or a distraction from having more and more letters being added to the acronym?
Well, it does tend, on the one hand, to make you aware of the heterogeneity. But as with other fields, such as, for example, the field of elder abuse, where we start to think about, yeah, definitions matter. And if you make your definitions too broad, you may lose some of your political clout. So there are times and places where you want to try to say there is homogeneity of thought or of need within particular minority groups. And other times when you want to highlight the differences.
Did you have anything to add to that, Brian?
Well, that's hard to follow, Gloria. That was really well said. I think it reflects sort of the development of the field. I think we used to use the term gay to represent gays and lesbians, and we tend to not really to think about bisexual or transgender. And as we started adding letters, it's a reflection of the maturity of the field, a recognition of the power that exists in the terms that we use, and our attempts to be inclusive. But the more we're adding to it, the more it appears that we're treating as categorical something that is continuous. And it's just like a 1,000 different categories on something that is continuous, and maybe a language to better describe that continuity is ultimately what will be most beneficial.
So with the research that you've been doing, I was just wondering, what do you feel are the next steps in, where do you go in end-of-life conversations? How do we take the next steps? How do we get people to take action?
Well, the aims of our project were multifaceted. We began with wanting to know more about the issues that were being faced by older LGBT people, And I was new to the field, and so I kept asking Brian about the literature, and it turns out that much of the literature is on gay men. And I said, well, what are the differences? Have we looked at the differences between gay men and lesbians and trans people? And I think that's one of the major benefits and products of our study in showing that there are some differences in the needs and in the experiences of the three groups that we want to draw to the attention of the three groups themselves as well as to service providers. So there's that piece. The second piece was to say, as we mentioned earlier, not just to focus on the problems, but also to focus on some of the things you can do about the problems. And so therefore part 2 of our study was to look at some of the resources that were available to the three different groups, or some that were appropriate for all three. And we are presenting those across the country in the context of town hall meetings, where people come to hear about the study, but also to say, what's in it for me? What do I need to know? What can I do? What are the kinds of conversations I should be getting involved in? And where do I find, if there are documents I need to sign, what are they? Where do I find them? And who are the people who are going to execute my wishes? So our reasons for doing the town halls are to bring this information to people, but also, as it were, to light a fire under them. And so part of the strategy is to ask them to fill out a survey. It's anonymous, but the first part of it tells a little bit about their orientations and who they are. The second part of it asks them, what have you done and what are you gonna do? And at the end, we ask those who would be willing to be re-interviewed or to come back and talk to us if they would give us their email. And the whole reason is to go back and say, you said when you came to the town hall that you were going to make a will.
Right.
But did you do it?
Well, this sounds like a quite a departure from what we usually think of as academia. You know, you go out there and you get your grants, and then you do your research and you put together some publications in an academic journal. And this is really community-based. You're out in the community, you know, you're trying to make an impact with the people, with the service providers. And just, what would you say on that, Brian? Where do you think we're going with this?
I agree. I think it's research that matters. And in some way, all research does, and I really believe that. But this has a direct implication, a direct line to hopefully creating some action that will improve the lives, the deaths of LGBT people, of people in general. I think it's really likely to have an effect in a way that I value.
Yeah. The other part that needs to be highlighted is sort of why was this project funded by TVN, which stands for Technology Evaluation in the Elderly. And at the time that we were designing this study, we were thinking about what's the technology angle. And the technology angle is in part the communications that are going to result from these videos that we've done. But also we have in mind that we will be developing a website that is specifically targeted to LGBT older adults who wish to find out information about LGBT-friendly services at the end of life.
And help create community. The idea of the town hall and even an aspect of the website is really with the extreme isolation that's been noted amongst LGBT older adults, and particularly amongst gay men, older gay men. The idea of having this information shared in a collective setting provides ready access, we hope, to others with whom these conversations might begin that could be followed through this web presence and elsewhere. And that's part of the fire Gloria was talking about, to both create action and create community.
Well, and how Brian and I got to this project was when we were sitting around dinner and discussing sort of the issues, and Brian said to me, well, in some of the conversations that the gay men in California had, the question came up of, if you had to go for a colonoscopy, who's going to pick you up after? Right? And that's sort of where the rubber hits the road, and you really have a very dramatic example of why you need to have some conversations.
Right. If you can't answer that question, think of the implications of what if something, some more significant health crisis befalls you, on whom will you call? And so that really became the flagship that allowed people to think of what the implications of this work might be.
All right, well, thanks for having this conversation with me and learning about the project. And we're going to be developing a website, as was mentioned, so definitely look there for more information on end-of-life conversations. And also it will have our resource inventory, and this inventory is going to be a living inventory. It'll be changing over time. We'll be adding resources based on the feedback from community partners and the attendees at the town hall meeting. All right, thank you.
Thanks.